For many years, traversing the border into the United States felt almost routine for Canadians. It was a process ingrained as second nature, characterized by simplicity and ease. There were no complex visa requirements, no significant administrative hurdles to navigate. The experience was typically one of open highways and welcoming interactions with border officials, marked by friendly greetings. This straightforward passage fostered a sense of trust and familiarity between the two nations, making cross-border trips for tourism, shopping, or visiting family relatively stress-free. The relationship seemed built on an implicit understanding, a mutual respect that made the border feel more like a formality than a barrier. Canadians often took this ease of access for granted, viewing the U.S. as an easily accessible extension of their own backyard. However, as we look towards the year 2025, a palpable shift is occurring, altering this long-standing dynamic. The atmosphere surrounding border crossings is changing, and the established trust appears to be diminishing. What precisely is driving this transformation, and what does it signify for the future of travel between Canada and the United States? Stay with us as we delve into these changes, and remember, we will be summarizing the key takeaways at the conclusion of this video. The world stage is constantly buzzing with significant events, and it's easy for subtle shifts to go unnoticed amidst the noise. Today, however, we're focusing on developments unfolding closer to home, specifically at the US-Canada border. Before we dive in, if you find this information valuable, please consider supporting our channel. Liking this video and subscribing helps us immensely in bringing you important updates and analyses. It truly makes a difference in our ability to continue producing this content. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our viewers around the globe. Now back to the border. The signs are becoming increasingly apparent. Something fundamental is changing in the way Canadians are perceived and processed when entering the U.S. Fingerprint scanning is becoming more common. Mobile phones are subject to searches. Questioning by border agents is often more extensive, and the overall demeanor of officials can feel less welcoming, sometimes even described as colder. The effortless, almost automatic trust that once defined the crossing experience seems to be eroding, replaced by a more cautious and scrutinized approach. This gradual alteration is significant, yet many Canadians remain unaware of the full extent of these changes and their potential implications. Is this merely an enhancement of security protocols in an uncertain world, or does it signal a deeper, quieter message? Could it be that the open arms once extended to Canadian visitors are slowly retracting, suggesting that Canadians might not be as unconditionally welcome as they once were? Consider the established practices that Canadians grew accustomed to over decades. For years, particularly for the significant population of Canadian snowbirds escaping winter climates, staying in the U.S. for extended periods was remarkably simple. The prevailing understanding allowed Canadians to remain in the United States for up to 6 months within any 12-month period, typically without needing special visas or facing complicated paperwork. This policy facilitated long-term visits, whether for leisure, escaping harsh weather, or maintaining properties south of the border. The process was generally hassle-free, reinforcing the notion of a uniquely open relationship between the two countries. Border crossings for these extended stays usually involved presenting a passport, answering standard questions about the purpose and duration of the visit, and perhaps showing proof of ties to Canada. It was a system built on a presumption of trust and low risk associated with Canadian visitors. This ease of access became a cornerstone of the cross-border lifestyle for many, shaping travel plans, retirement decisions, and even economic patterns in border regions. But the landscape began its transformation leading into the year 2025. The familiar procedures started to give way to new requirements and a different atmosphere at the point of entry, catching many travelers off guard and signaling a fundamental shift in border management philosophy. The introduction of the so-called 30-day rule represents a significant departure from the previous 6-month allowance and has caused considerable confusion. Under the revised regulations anticipated for 2025, the duration Canadians can stay in the U.S. without formal registration is drastically reduced to just 30 days. To stay longer, Canadians are now required to register online with U.S. immigration authorities before their intended stay exceeds this threshold. This procedural change marks a substantial shift from the prior, more lenient approach. This policy adjustment is framed as part of a wider initiative by U.S. authorities to more accurately track the entry and exit of long-term visitors, enhancing overall border management and security oversight. However, the implementation and communication surrounding this new rule have been problematic. A major issue is the lack of widespread awareness among the Canadian public. Many Canadians, accustomed to the previous 6-month guideline, are simply unaware that this crucial change exists or is imminent. This information gap has led to a surge in confusion, particularly among snowbirds whose travel patterns are directly impacted. Immigration lawyers report a significant increase in inquiries and cases related to this rule change, highlighting the uncertainty it has created. Organizations representing snowbirds are actively lobbying for exemptions or clearer guidelines, concerned about the potential disruption to their members' long-standing travel habits and lifestyles. The transition hasn't been smooth, and reports are already surfacing of travelers receiving warnings or encountering unexpected difficulties at the border due to this new regulation. Many are only now realizing that their ability to stay in the U.S. for extended periods, once taken for granted, is subject to new, stricter limitations and potential complications if the registration process isn't followed correctly. The impact is not just bureaucratic. It touches upon the very perception of welcome and ease that historically defined the Canada-U.S. border experience for long-term visitors. It's a development that necessitates careful attention and adaptation from Canadian travelers planning extended stays south of the border. Don't forget to watch until the end, where we'll summarize the key implications of these border changes. The statistical evidence underscores the reality of this changing dynamic. Data from Statistics Canada revealed a notable decline in cross-border traffic. Specifically, there was a reported drop of nearly 32% in vehicle re-entries from the U.S. back into Canada during March, compared to the same period in the preceding year. While various factors can influence travel numbers, such a significant decrease strongly suggests that the new border climate, including the 30-day rule confusion and increased scrutiny, is having a tangible effect on Canadians' travel decisions. This isn't merely about filling out an additional online form. It represents a fundamental shift in how Canadian travelers are being viewed and processed at the U.S. border. The experience that once felt overwhelmingly smooth, almost an effortless extension of travel within North America, now carries an undercurrent of apprehension. It feels less like a simple passage between friendly neighbors and more like an examination, a test of admissibility. This change raises uncomfortable questions for Canadians. Are we genuinely welcome visitors, or are we increasingly being treated as individuals who are merely tolerated, subject to suspicion until proven otherwise? This subtle but significant alteration in the border experience is prompting many Canadians to reconsider their travel plans. The spontaneity and ease associated with trips to the U.S. are diminishing, replaced by concerns about potential delays, intrusive questioning, or even denial of entry based on new, less transparent criteria. The psychological impact is considerable, fostering a sense that the border, once a symbol of North American integration and friendship, is becoming a more formidable and less predictable barrier. It's a trend that warrants close monitoring, as it reflects not just policy changes, but a potential cooling in the relationship between the two nations at the individual traveler level. Perhaps one of the most jarring changes for Canadians crossing into the U.S. in the 2025 era is the increased likelihood of being asked to surrender personal electronic devices for inspection. What used to be a straightforward process, showing identification, answering a few questions, and proceeding, has evolved into something potentially far more invasive. Reports indicate that Canadian travelers are increasingly being instructed by U.S. border agents to hand over their smartphones, laptops, tablets, and other digital devices upon arrival. Crucially, under current U.S. law and policy interpretations, border agents possess the legal authority to search these devices without needing a warrant or even reasonable suspicion. This broad power means officials can delve into a traveler's personal digital life, scrolling through private messages, examining photos and videos, reviewing web browsing history, and even accessing social media accounts. The traveler, in this situation, generally has no legal right to refuse the search if they wish to enter the country. Cooperating is often presented as a condition of entry, placing individuals in a difficult position where they must choose between their privacy and their travel plans. This practice has understandably raised significant privacy concerns among Canadians and civil liberties groups on both sides of the border. The potential for misuse of personal information, misunderstandings based on content taken out of context, or even denial of entry based on personal opinions or associations found on a device is a source of growing anxiety. The implications of warrantless device searches at the border are far-reaching and deeply concerning for many travelers. This policy has generated serious debate and apprehension, particularly following reports where Canadians were allegedly flagged, subjected to lengthy questioning, or even denied entry based on information discovered on their devices. Examples cited include instances where political opinions expressed online, affiliations with certain groups, or even seemingly harmless content like old memes or jokes from years prior were reportedly used as grounds for suspicion or adverse action by border officials. Even content that might be considered innocuous or taken out of context within a traveler's personal digital sphere could potentially be misinterpreted or used to justify heightened scrutiny or denial of entry. What makes this practice particularly unsettling is the lack of transparency surrounding these searches. There is often no clear explanation provided as to why a particular individual was selected for a device search, what specific information is being sought, or how the gathered data will be used or stored. This opacity fuels fears of arbitrary targeting and potential misuse of private information. The Canadian government itself has acknowledged this reality, starting to issue warnings advising its citizens traveling to the U.S. to expect the possibility of digital searches at the border. These official advisories often note that such searches can occur without clear cause, and that travelers may not receive an explanation for the intrusion. This shift transforms the border crossing from a routine travel formality into a potential privacy minefield. The personal data that individuals reasonably expect to remain private is now potentially exposed to inspection without judicial oversight. The fear generated by this possibility is tangible, altering the perception of the border crossing from a simple journey to an experience fraught with potential interrogation and the unsettling prospect of having one's digital life laid bare. The apprehension surrounding U.S. border crossings extends beyond the general traveling public and into the academic community. In 2025, it wasn't solely the Canadian government expressing concern. A highly respected academic institution also sounded the alarm. The Canadian Association of University Teachers, CAUT, an organization representing a vast body of over 72,000 professors, researchers, and academic professionals across the country, took the rare step of issuing a travel advisory cautioning its members about visiting the United States. This was not a generalized or vague suggestion. It was a specific and direct recommendation for faculty members to carefully reconsider any planned travel to the U.S. for conferences, research collaborations, or other professional activities. The advisory highlighted particular risks for individuals belonging to certain groups, urging extra caution for those who are transgender, racialized, known for politically outspoken views, or members of any other marginalized community. The rationale behind this extraordinary warning stemmed from what CAUT described as a disturbing and growing trend observed at the U.S. border. Their concerns were based on reports of Canadian academics facing harassment, unduly invasive questioning unrelated to legitimate border security concerns, and unexplained detentions or denials of entry specifically targeting individuals from these demographic groups. The CAUT travel advisory was a significant development, signaling that the issues at the border were perceived as more than just minor inconveniences. It framed the situation as a matter of personal safety and academic freedom. The advisory wasn't merely about potential travel delays or bureaucratic hurdles, it was fundamentally about protection. It reflected serious concerns that certain Canadian academics could face targeted scrutiny or mistreatment based on their identity, research topics, or expressed viewpoints. In practical terms, The advisory urged Canadians, particularly those within the academic community, who might fall into the highlighted risk categories, to take precautionary measures. Suggestions included wiping sensitive data from electronic devices before travel, limiting the amount of personal information carried across the border, and being mentally prepared for the possibility of being flagged or subjected to enhanced screening. The underlying message was clear. The border environment had become sufficiently unpredictable and potentially hostile for certain groups that even routine academic travel carried new risks. This warning from a major academic body underscored the broader anxieties permeating Canadian society about the changing nature of the U.S. border experience. It highlighted that the issues were systemic enough to warrant institutional-level caution, affecting not just individual tourists, but also the vital cross-border flow of knowledge and collaboration that relies on academic exchange. The fact that universities and their representative bodies felt compelled to issue such guidance speaks volumes about the perceived shift in the border climate. Sometimes, the most profound indicators of change are not found in official decrees or dramatic events, but in the quiet, cumulative shifts in behavior. Behind the headlines and policy debates, a subtle but significant trend emerged in 2025. Canadians were beginning to quietly pull back from traveling to the United States. This wasn't an organized boycott or a vocal protest movement. Rather, it manifested as a slow, almost imperceptible retreat, a collective hesitation driven by the growing unease and uncertainty surrounding the border crossing experience. While difficult to quantify precisely without explicit polling on motivations, the effects of this silent pullback started making ripples, particularly in U.S. border towns and tourist destinations heavily reliant on Canadian visitors. Anecdotal evidence and emerging data points painted a picture of diminished Canadian presence. As mentioned earlier, early 2025 data indicated a substantial 23% decline in Canadian visits to the U.S. compared to the previous year. This reduction wasn't isolated. It translated into fewer cars crossing the border, a noticeable drop in hotel bookings in traditionally popular areas, and a general decrease in the number of Canadians showing up for weekend getaways, shopping trips, or longer vacations. Businesses located in border regions like Maine, Michigan, and other northern states, which have historically thrived on the influx of Canadian dollars, began to notice and report the shift. The economic impact, though perhaps slow to fully materialize, was becoming a concern for communities whose prosperity was intertwined with cross-border tourism and commerce. The sentiment captured by a motel owner in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, encapsulated the situation effectively. They noted seeing cancellations at a rate unseen in years, explicitly stating that the cancellations were predominantly from Canadian clientele. Their observation wasn't that Canadians were necessarily angry or staging a deliberate economic protest, but rather that they seemed fundamentally uneasy. There was a pervasive uncertainty about crossing the border, a worry about the potential for being searched, delayed, questioned extensively, or unexpectedly flagged by authorities. What had once been considered an easy and routine day trip for shopping, dining, or sightseeing across the border now felt burdened with potential hassles and risks. This hesitation, multiplied across thousands of potential travelers, was translating into a tangible decline in visits. The fact that this reluctance was widespread enough to be noticed by business owners and reflected in preliminary travel statistics signaled a significant shift in perception. It suggested that the accumulation of changes, the stricter rules, the invasive searches, the unequal treatment, and the lack of transparency was eroding the confidence and comfort level that had long underpinned Canadian travel to the U.S. It was a sign that the relationship between the two countries, at least from the perspective of the everyday Canadian traveler, was undergoing a potentially deep and lasting transformation, moving away from the easy familiarity of the past towards a future marked by greater caution and distance. One of the most deeply troubling aspects of the evolving U.S. border situation for Canadians in 2025 is the growing concern around unequal scrutiny. The perception and reported reality that certain groups face a disproportionately higher level of inspection and suspicion based solely on their identity. While border security inherently involves questioning and inspection for all travelers, emerging reports and anecdotal evidence suggest a disturbing pattern where treatment varies significantly depending on a person's background. There's a clear bias manifesting in how individuals are processed. Canadians with Middle Eastern-sounding names, those of South Asian descent, or individuals readily identifiable as Muslim are reportedly facing more invasive searches, longer and more probing interviews, and generally deeper scrutiny than other travelers, even when their travel history and documentation are identical. This disparity isn't part of any publicly stated official policy. There are no government announcements detailing different screening levels based on ethnicity or religion, no press releases justifying such practices. Yet the experiences reported by travelers and documented by civil rights organizations indicate that this differential treatment is happening consistently on the ground. It creates an environment where individuals feel targeted not for any specific action or legitimate security concern, but simply because of their name, appearance, or presumed religious affiliation. This pattern of unequal scrutiny has profound implications. Civil rights groups and legal advocates in both Canada and the U.S. have voiced strong concerns about this trend, highlighting the potential for racial and religious profiling at the border. The issue is widespread, yet difficult to address systematically due to the lack of transparency and the broad discretion afforded to border officials. For many Canadians belonging to these groups, the border crossing experience is transforming from a simple travel procedure into a source of significant anxiety and potential humiliation. It's not merely about the inconvenience of longer questioning. It's about the deeply unsettling feeling of being singled out, of being treated as inherently more suspicious, without any reasonable cause. It fosters a sense of being unwelcome, of being viewed as an outsider simply because of one's heritage or faith. This erosion of trust impacts not only the individuals directly affected, but also the broader relationship between the diverse communities within Canada and the U.S. border authorities. It suggests that the principles of equal treatment and non-discrimination are not being consistently applied at this critical point of interaction between the two nations. The psychological toll of anticipating or experiencing such biased treatment is significant, creating a barrier that goes far beyond the physical border itself. It's a silent form of discrimination that, while often subtle, is deeply felt by those who encounter it, further contributing to the growing sense of unease among many Canadian travelers. Perhaps the most insidious and frustrating aspect of the heightened scrutiny at the U.S. border in 2025 is the phenomenon often described as once flagged, always flagged. This refers to the persistent, seemingly permanent nature of suspicion that can attach to a traveler after just one incident of being stopped, questioned extensively, or denied entry, even if the reasons for the initial flag were unclear or ultimately unfounded. Numerous Canadians have reported that after experiencing such an encounter, they are treated differently on every subsequent border crossing attempt. This isn't necessarily about being placed on a formal, acknowledged watch list or having a clear mark against their name in a transparent system. Instead, it often manifests as a more subtle but consistent pattern of being pulled aside for secondary screening, facing more detailed questioning, or experiencing longer delays, trip after trip. It's as if the border security apparatus possesses an institutional memory, and once an individual is marked, for reasons they may never fully understand, they are never truly considered in the clear again. Travelers who have been flagged, sometimes years prior, find themselves repeatedly subjected to this heightened scrutiny, despite having updated passports, valid visas, clean records, and no discernible change in their circumstances or travel patterns. This persistence creates a profound sense of powerlessness and anxiety. There's often no official explanation given for why they were initially flagged, making it impossible to understand the basis of the suspicion. Furthermore, there appears to be no clear process for challenging or removing this flag from their implicit record. Travelers are left in a state of perpetual uncertainty, never knowing if their next border crossing will be smooth, or if they will once again be subjected to delays and intrusive questioning. This lack of transparency and recourse is deeply unsettling. The Canadian government has even advised travelers that decisions made by U.S. border officials are typically final, with no established appeals process, and that explanations for these decisions are often not provided. For those caught in this cycle, it can feel like being trapped in an endless loop of suspicion. Each border crossing becomes a reminder of a past incident, reinforcing the feeling of being under constant surveillance. This ongoing scrutiny, detached from any current wrongdoing or specific threat, transforms what should be a simple journey into a recurring ordeal. It underscores the shift away from a border crossing based on routine checks towards one characterized by persistent, often unexplained, suspicion, contributing significantly to the chilling effect on Canadian travel to the U.S. In conclusion, the landscape of crossing the U.S.-Canada border has undeniably shifted from the relatively open and trusting environment many Canadians took for granted for decades. As we've explored, the changes unfolding, particularly around the 2025 timeframe, are multifaceted and significant. The introduction of stricter rules, such as the 30-day registration requirement for stays exceeding that period, has replaced the former 6-month ease, causing confusion and impacting long-term visitors like snowbirds. Furthermore, the increased practice of warrantless searches of personal electronic devices raises serious privacy concerns, with reports suggesting that personal data, political views, or even old social media content could lead to heightened scrutiny or denial of entry. This lack of transparency in device searches adds another layer of anxiety for travelers. Compounding these issues are the warnings issued by academic institutions like CAUT, advising caution for certain groups due to reported harassment and invasive questioning, signaling that the border climate is perceived as potentially unsafe or discriminatory for marginalized communities. This has contributed to a silent pullback, where fewer Canadians are choosing to travel to the U.S., evidenced by declining visitor numbers and economic impacts felt in U.S. border towns. The underlying issue of unequal scrutiny, where individuals report being treated differently based on their ethnicity, religion, or name, further erodes trust and fosters a sense of unease. Finally, the once flagged, always flagged phenomenon, where an initial incident leads to persistent suspicion on subsequent crossings without clear cause or recourse, creates a lasting sense of anxiety and powerlessness for affected travelers. Collectively, these developments paint a picture of a border experience that is becoming increasingly complex, less predictable, and for many, less welcoming. The automatic assumption of trust and ease has been replaced by a palpable sense of caution and scrutiny. While enhanced security is often cited as the driver, the lack of transparency, the potential for profiling, and the enduring nature of suspicion raise fundamental questions about fairness, privacy, and the very nature of the U.S.-Canada relationship at the human level. The easy, open road between the two countries feels different now, marked by new hurdles and a growing sense of apprehension. Whether this represents a temporary phase driven by specific security concerns, or a more permanent shift towards a more guarded and less integrated North American border remains to be seen. But the impact on Canadian travelers and the cross-border relationship is already being felt. The days of effortless crossing seem to be fading, replaced by a new reality that demands greater awareness, preparation, and perhaps a degree of resignation from those who wish to travel south.